last paper. Presenter is Bilal of Mehmood, who is from GC University. Enquiry into the economic consequences of digital reorganization.
Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all, distinguished chair and respected guests, my fellow colleagues. I hope the slide will be open and we can start the paper's presentation. This is the title of the paper, An Inquiry into Macroeconomic Consequences of Digital Divide. And this is my name and this is my email, and we can move to the first slide. Before we go into the empirics of this paper, we should understand what this digital divide means. This digital divide basically is, it goes back to this concept given by Kondrativ, because he suggested that the world over, the economies, they move with some waves, some tides, some upswings and downswings. And the fifth wave is the wave of IT. As we will see in the next diagram, before we go there, we can see that the first revolution was of industrial revolution, and then age of steam and engineering, and then age of steel, electricity, and then age of oil. Now we talk about the fifth wave that people believe is the wave of information technology. This diagram will help us to understand this. You can see the fifth wave, as suggested by Kondrativ, is of information technology, and we are living the fifth wave as theorized by Kondrativ. Next slide. Now we might be able to understand the digital divide, because it's about the information and communication technology. Previously the word was information technology, but now it is enriched to another level, that is information and communication technology, because it's a very dynamic thing, this technology. It evolves every year. Rather, we can expect it to develop even during the months. So what we see is a dynamic nature of this technology. And then we can trace this concept back to 1960s, where there was an idea given by Singer of technological dualism. Today's technological dualism, as I expect, as well as this James expect, is of IT dualism, because there are countries in the world who have more IT and there are other countries in the world who have less IT. So it's a similar situation as we have income inequality world over. So this is how we can say that we have digital haves and digital have-nots. Digitally rich people, information rich nations, and information poor nations. This is how we can formulate the concept of digital divide. And if we want to, have a bird's eye view of the literature that exists, there are some references on the next slide. As you can see that there is current research which is being conducted during the last decade. So the concept is new, we are researching on a new area. And the evidence is found in the databases, as we have Connectivity Scoreboard, Knowledge for Development, ICT 4D, and International Telecommunication Union. These are the international databases and organizations that conduct surveys and accumulate data. That verifies. Now there is yet another set of terms that we should know, that we are coming out of the traditional economy. We are talking about knowledge economy, we are talking about information economy, we are talking about electronic economy, information economy, digital economy. There can be more substitutes. Traditional economy, we are moving into this, out of that into this set of economies. And we are getting now specific to the definition, the gap between the individual, household, business, and geographic areas at different socio-economic levels with regard both to their opportunities to access to information technology, IT, and their use of the internet for a wide variety of activities. So it's about having access and being able to use that for productive purposes. This is my formulation, this is what I thought. Why I'm saying that this is my thought, because the causes of digital divide, they have been discussed before. But I haven't seen any paper in the literature that tells us the macroeconomic consequences of digital divide on the economies. So this was my brainchild that I came up with this framework, that economic factors, they are there to affect the income differences. But there is another thing, that is digital divide, that affects the income differences. Now I should come to the income differences. Next slide, please. Next. Next. Now you can see this reference of Scholar and Wexig in 2009. They have basically, it's an article, Diffusion of Development, very famous article. And now the trend of growth empirics is moving towards finding out the the income differences, rather take growth or income itself. Now we are talking about the income differences, so that we could find out the comparative position of the nations. So I chose to select this rather than simply growth or income. So we'll come back to the point. 2 slides back, please. 2 slides back. Now, this is how I formulated this index, because as I told you before, ICT is a very dynamic, very diverse concept. I have accumulated that because some people believe, the reference will be seen in the next slide, that we should merge the proxy of ICT, because it's just not one indicator. We use a lot of things. We use mobiles, we use internet, we use broadband, wireless technologies, fixed telephone lines, internet, which is not broadband at times. So we should merge them into one proxy, which is wholesome. International Telecommunication Union, they have their own index, that is IDI. I borrowed that idea and I modified that according to the availability of the data that I had in World Development Indicators and ITU. And I formed this indicator that I called as Ict Maturation Index. And it contains equal weight, because there is no empirical evidence that tells that which one of the item is being used the most or more than others. So I have, I have done a little bit of compromise by giving them equal weights. It can be improved. I highlight that myself, but it is being used here as I have shown in the next slide. The table will show that I have given these weights to these 5 proxies of ICT, and we can merge them and get a wholesome proxy for ICTMI. And this is the reference that guides us that we should develop accumulated proxies for ICTMI. Next slide. These are the data sources, the data dimensions. 24 countries unfortunately could have been available for the data, because this is a new dimension. Data is scarce. We are talking about Asian countries, so we don't expect much of the data to be available. So I wish I could have extended that, but it was my limitation as dictated by the availability of the data. The data was there from 2001 to 2010. And there are other reasons that I have highlighted that why I have selected these countries. Because I had to estimate the digital differences based upon digital frontiers. So that's why I had to come up with this data set. I'll come to those calculations then. This is the source, rather there are 2 of them, ITU and WDI, the most famous sources world over. This is the model that came into my mind, that income differences can be affected by the overall proxy, the other variables like capital, one of the necessary variable of growth empirics, and then SCRT, the tertiary school enrollment ratio as used by Barrow and other famous researchers in growth regressions, and then FDI, which I expect should have a role to play, and then trade openness, again an inter-country variable that can affect growth differences. Now this is the econometric specification coming up with the error term, which all of you are well familiar, shouldn't waste your time on that. If you go back, these are the references that guide us, that help us, because there isn't any article that I have found has done that. That's why I had to resort to similar references, if not the same. This is how I calculated the digital differences and the income differences. Very simple difference, the subtraction. YCD age is the income, the highest income in the sample, and IT is the country under consideration. So this is how a very simple difference has been calculated that tells us that how a country is far away from the country with the highest income. And then its possibility, its range, it's a mathematical thing. We can come skip that, but then there is the new thing, absolute digital divides. They have been calculated after estimating ICTMI. I have selected a digital frontier. A digital frontier is the country having the highest ICTMI. So that was selected as a reference, and the other countries were subtracted for their ICTMI. And in the same fashion, we can estimate the digital differences for individual proxies, which are not used in this analysis, but I have just referred to their formula. This is how I have used the spider diagram that guides us about various components of the same variable in one diagram. So you can see that over time, starting from 2001 to 2010, I have plotted these, and the one which is at the left top, it's the mobile digital divide, and you can see it is increasing over time, and all of them have been plotted, the 5 individual proxies as well as the overall proxy. So a little bit of interpretation, it is on the next slide. It's of the Korea. I mean, I could have made, and I have made all of them, but didn't display it here because the 24 countries mean so many graphs. I chose this for absolute. Now I should come towards the empirical analysis. There are panel data techniques, most of them, they have been used, but if endogeneity is there, we should come towards generalized method of movements or instrumental variable regressions. So that's why I applied some tests which are in front of you. They show that there is heterogeneity. We didn't resort to fixed effects or other simple techniques. And now we have heteroscedasticity. As per the references given, Baum, he suggests that if there is heteroscedasticity in the presence of IV, that is instrumental variables, we should use GMM rather than IV regression. So not wasting your time here. The results, they are in front of you. This is again a jargonized language of econometrics that tells us about the instruments, validity and their strength. And then further conditions, they are there, you can read the literature. Woodman has done a lot of work on that, Baum as well. Next slide please. And I have referred them all to make the methodology valid. This is the overall result, and I have highlighted the main variable of interest that tells that there is a positive association of this variable with income differences, and it is statistically significant as well, though at 5%, which is acceptable. And the other main thing, there are so many things, economizing on time. Other thing is Hansen J test, which is non-significant, showing the validity of the instruments that are used. So these are the two main things that I wanted to highlight. The validity of system GMM, that is evident by a value less than 1, and then the main variable, which is the beef in our research. It is having a positive association. The other variables, capital, should have a negative relationship. FDI and trade, they should have a negative relationship because they have the tendency to mitigate the income differences between the two countries. SERT as well, it's a helpful variable to overcome the income differences. And we have, this is the reason for that, as I have briefly told you. Time domains are included for some econometric concerns, and for autocorrelation and for the validity of instruments, these are the tests that have been estimated. Again, for the subset of the instruments, these tests are estimated. Then, I have done this exercise, similar exercise for relative digital divide. That was absolute because we were taking the difference. I can also take the ratio. So, by taking ratio, I can also come up with the differences, the disparity, I should say. Not going to repeat that much. Next slide, next slide, next slide. So you can see similar results are there. It is also having the similar sort of results, which means next, you can come back, which means that the hypothesis that was imagined by me has been proved empirically under the light of this research. And another stamp of validity on it is this simple correlation matrix that shows that the income differences have high correlation with the digital divide in absolute sense as well as the relative sense. So this is what we have. I have tried to open a new avenue of research for all of you, and the house is open for the questions if they are to be asked now. Thank you.
thank you all presenters. I think it was very good management of time. So we have about 35 to 40 minutes. I think what we can do to even make it more efficient is to start with each paper, and anyone has questions, you can ask a question, and we'll have about 5 minutes to each presenter and the question answer. And finally, we have Bilal, Mr. Bilal Ahmed, Mehmood, sorry, ICT.
Not much. No, relationship there is.
As Bilal also claimed, Bilal's topic is a bit of, I should say, it's something that is new in the field of economics and development, that he is now coming up with the concept of digital divide. My small comment will be that you have highlighted only the case of Korea. I think there will be some interesting cases as well that you may need to consider to underline the importance of ICT in overall growth, as well as perhaps in terms of the effects of globalization as well.
May I say? Sir is absolutely right. I said in the slide that there are 24 countries due to the restriction of the data. I just plotted one of them, which was Korea. I have also plotted Pakistan, and I have plotted rest of the countries, but couldn't be merged into this small presentation. Definitely, each country has its own traits. Korea is a local IT player, a country that produces ITs, just not an importer of ITs, just like we are. We are not the producers of IT, only make some softwares, that's it. So hardware is a missing thing in our country.
Yes, only one question.
Actually, if we study development economics, we find different parameters to categorize the countries into developing nations, like per capita income inequalities, a lot of things there. You talked about have and have nots, so actually this is not a question, but this is only for my knowledge. Whether in the previous literature the countries have been categorized as have and have nots on the basis of IT?
I haven't found any report or any data set that puts a threshold on that. I mean, there are a lot of proxies, just like I have used one of them. Another two of them. One is the difference, other is the ratio. We can also find out standard deviation, variance. So we can categorize that on the basis of IT. I have done that by using the digital frontier. But I haven't seen any report that, that makes a category, just like World Development, World Bank has for the income levels. But that would be interesting.
Thank you, Bilal. Kausar has one comment on the paper, and he has some general comments. Give him 2.5 minutes.
Just one quick comment on your paper. Fawad Bajwa at FCU, he was doing some study on digital divide using data from Facebook. So you might want to kind of get in touch with him and talk to him about what kind of work he was actually very interested in. But his area was Middle East. So that might be interesting for you. Now the general comments, when I came in here, Sir's question was, are you an economist? I said no. He gave me a very strange look. So after listening to all these papers, I realized why that strange look. I have more of a business background. So when all those tests and things like that started coming in, there might have been, as well as any language, as far as I understood them. So I was really interested in some of the recommendation, conclusion, because they kind of opened up avenues for me, as well as kind of gave me some idea of how we can use this thing in our existing program. So thank you very much, every one of you, for listening carefully and for not laughing at me while I made a fool of myself during this period. Thank you very much.